What does it mean to be accountable? Is it a badge of honor, a burden, or a bridge that connects us to others? Imagine accountability as a currency. Every honest action deposits trust into our reputation, while every failure to own up withdraws from it. In a world hungry for trust, accountability can make or break careers, relationships, communities. One study found 62% of consumers trust a company more if it's transparent about its practices. Accountability builds credibility, like interest in a bank. But accountability isn't just about public image. It's deeply personal, even psychological. It can empower us to grow, or, when warped, it can shackle us with shame or manipulation. Welcome to this deep dive on accountability. In the next 10 chapters, we'll explore how accountability shapes our social credit, how it can be distorted by trauma or culture, how technology and power dynamics complicate it, and how shame and growth intertwine with it. We'll see real examples, from public figures' apologies that rang hollow, to silent bystanders whose inaction spoke louder than words. Each chapter unpacks a new layer, from the fiercely independent who over-own everything to the community that learns to share responsibility. By the end, we'll move from self to society, discovering how accountability thrives not in isolation, but in connection. So, if you're ready for a provocative, enlightening journey, one that might challenge how you view yourself and others, let's begin. Accountability isn't a destination, it's a lifelong voyage.
Chapter 1: The Currency of Accountability. Reputation and Trust. In the bank of public trust, accountability is legal tender. Each time you act with integrity and own your actions, you deposit goodwill into your reputation. But each failure or cover-up can bankrupt that trust. Think of high-profile leaders who dodged blame and saw their credibility crumble overnight, versus those who faced the music and earned public respect. Research in corporate ethics backs this up. Accountability and transparency directly bolster reputation. In one example, a 2022 Deloitte survey showed 62% of consumers are more likely to trust a company transparent about its use of AI. Accountability buys trust in the marketplace. On a personal level, the same principle applies. If you consistently keep your word and admit mistakes, people learn they can rely on you. If you break promises or shift blame, that credit score plunges. We've all seen it. A friend who never apologizes or a coworker who always finds a scapegoat starts losing the benefit of the doubt. Accountability is like a mirror reflecting your character, and every action polishes or smudges it. Accountability isn't just about punishment or image. It's about earning credibility. Accountability is a currency in leadership. It doesn't erase mistakes, but it builds trust. Each honest admission is like paying a small cost now to avoid a bigger debt later. Over time, a reputation for accountability becomes a form of capital. Colleagues, friends, and the public invest trust in you because they believe you'll do the right thing. And when you falter, being human, you inevitably will. That reservoir of trust can make the difference between forgiveness and failure. If accountability is so valued, why do some of us try to shoulder everything ourselves, refusing to let anyone else in? Sometimes, strong personal accountability is actually trauma-born hyper-independence. In the next chapter, we'll explore how the drive to do it all alone can masquerade as accountability, and what's really happening under the surface.
Chapter 2: Accountability versus hyper-independence, trauma, overfunctioning, and the solo burden. She's the one who handles everything. He's the guy who never asks for help. They seem incredibly accountable, always responsible, always in control. But what if that iron grip on responsibility is hiding a wound? Sometimes hyper-independence and overfunctioning are mistaken for accountability. The person who never delegates, who feels personally responsible for every outcome, might not be the healthiest role model of accountability. They might be coping with trauma. Hyper-independence often develops as a trauma response. When you've been let down in the past, you learn not to trust others, so you rely only on yourself. In fact, hyper-independence is a coping mechanism from traumatic experiences. This can look like extreme accountability. You're taking responsibility for every aspect of life, but it's self-protection. The overfunctioner in a family or team might be carrying a silent belief: If I don't do it, no one will, and I can't be let down. Consider a child who grew up in chaos, where the adults were unreliable or harmful. Such children take on adult responsibilities far too young, called parentification. A survivor of childhood abuse might recall at age 10, cooking meals for siblings or mediating parental fights. That child learns to be hyper-responsible, anticipating everyone's needs and never expressing their own. Fast forward to adulthood, that person may appear as the pillar of accountability, always early, overly prepared, shouldering extra work without complaint. Yet inside, this behavior is driven by fear and learned mistrust, not a healthy sense of duty. Therapists describe such individuals as overfunctioning, constantly striving for perfection, trying to fix everything, and carrying excessive burdens. The line between genuine accountability and hyper-independence can be thin. Healthy accountability means owning your role while recognizing your limits. Hyper-independence ignores those limits. It's the colleague who never says no and burns out, the friend who won't share vulnerability because they don't want to burden others. They may say, "I'm handling my responsibilities," but in truth, they often feel alone, resentful, and exhausted. This masquerade of accountability can lead to burnout and strained relationships. When one person overfunctions, it lets others underfunction. Recognizing this pattern is the first step. Real accountability doesn't mean doing everything yourself. It means being accountable enough to ask for help or to set boundaries. If trauma taught you're on your own, the work is learning that sharing responsibility isn't weakness, it's healing. In a healthy team or family, accountability is collective. Everyone plays their part, and no one person has to carry the whole world. Speaking of carrying the world, what happens when our drive for self-improvement and productivity goes into overdrive? In the next chapter, we examine accountability fatigue, how the culture of constant self-betterment and hustle can backfire, leading to burnout, toxic productivity, and even a dopamine addiction to achievement.
Chapter 3: Accountability Fatigue, Self-Help, Burnout, Dopamine Loops, and Toxic Productivity. Tick off another task on your to-do list. Feel that little rush? Post a self-improvement goal online, get likes and encouragement? The pursuit of accountability and productivity can be exhilarating until it becomes exhausting. Welcome to accountability fatigue, the burnout that comes from trying to be too responsible, too productive, too on all the time. Modern self-help culture preaches extreme accountability. Own every second of your day, crush those goals, never procrastinate. On the surface, these messages inspire improvement. But taken too far, they morph into toxic productivity, a compulsive need to always be doing more. Psychology experts have observed that toxic productivity links self-worth to output, fueling burnout and emotional exhaustion. The moment we base our value on how much we achieve or how perfectly we stick to the plan, we set ourselves up for a dangerous cycle. Part of that cycle is dopamine addiction to accomplishment. Neuroscience shows when we complete a task, no matter how small, our brain releases a hit of dopamine, the feel-good neurotransmitter. That's why it feels satisfying to cross items off a checklist. As one productivity coach explains, this can become a self-reinforcing loop. We seek the next task, chasing the transient high of productivity. It's like being a productivity junkie, ever eager for the next fix of "I did it." Combine this with the endless buffet of self-improvement content, books, podcasts, courses, and social media feeds that glorify hustle culture, and you have a recipe for accountability overload. Instead of feeling proud and effective, people start feeling guilty for resting, anxious that they're never doing enough. Psychologists point out that high achievers may overwork to avoid deeper anxieties or shame about inadequacy. In the context of accountability, this means someone might push themselves relentlessly, waking up at 5 a.m. to fit in a workout, studying late, optimizing every minute, not out of passion, but out of fear. It becomes a burnout loop. Work harder to feel okay, briefly feel accomplished, then notice others working harder or setting more goals, and feel inadequate again. This burnout ties to what some call toxic positivity, or the pressure to always self-optimize. It's as if taking a break or admitting "I can't keep up" is a moral failure. Over time, the dopamine-fueled sprint is unsustainable. Motivation crashes, fatigue and cynicism set in. People swing from intense goal chasing to total shutdown. Think of the YouTuber posting daily grind content for months, then suddenly announcing they're quitting for mental health. What's the antidote? It starts with balance and self-compassion. Fatigue is a sign that accountability has lost its healthy purpose. Real accountability isn't about endless productivity. It's about consistency and honesty. Sometimes that honesty means acknowledging you're exhausted and need rest, essentially being accountable to your own well-being, not just to tasks and others. Setting realistic goals, celebrating small wins, and allowing guilt-free downtime improve long-term accountability. After all, an overworked brain is like an overworked muscle. At a certain point, it fails. In this hyper-productive era, remember productivity is a means, not an end. The point of holding yourself accountable is to reach meaningful goals, not to become a task-completing machine. Breaking the burnout loop might mean redefining success, not just how much you do, but how well you align with what truly matters. Let's turn to the growing role of technology in our self-accountability. From fitness trackers counting our steps to AI apps nudging our habits, we have created digital mirrors to evaluate our every move. Chapter 4 peers into the AI mirror, the promise and peril of letting technology track and judge our behavior.
Chapter 4. The AI Mirror. Picture this. You wake up to a smartwatch report on your sleep quality. Your phone pings you to stand because you've been idle. A productivity app tallies your focus hours. And an AI coach reminds you of your goals. It's you, reflected by an algorithm. Redefining accountability in real time. We now have gadgets and apps that hold us accountable, or at least try to, for steps walked, calories eaten, screen time, and spending habits. But handing over the reins of our self-awareness to technology, we face a double-edged sword. Greater insight and discipline, but new risks to privacy, autonomy, and true self-reflection. These tools can be powerful. A fitness tracker buzzing when you've been sedentary can prompt you to move. Budgeting apps can flash warnings when you near your spending limit. Some workplaces use AI to monitor productivity, like logging keyboard activity or analyzing online behavior. To ensure employees stay accountable, it's like having a personal assistant or coach constantly watching out for your better self. However, there's a darker side. As one tech ethicist observed, these AI systems assess, surveil, predict, and manage aspects of human thought, emotion, and behavior. We're outsourcing self-awareness, self-knowledge, and self-agency. By relying on an external algorithm to tell us who we are or whether we're doing good or bad, we risk losing some of our own agency. Are you hitting your goal because it's meaningful to you, or because a smartwatch told you to? If an app didn't remind you, would you still do it? The locus of control shifts. You become accountable to the app or the data, rather than to your inner values or real-world relationships. There are also privacy and psychological implications. These tools collect intimate data about our lives. If misused, that data could be exposed or exploited. The mere act of constant self-tracking can induce anxiety or obsession. Studies have found that excessive self-quantification can heighten stress and perfectionism. People become fixated on the numbers and lose sight of the bigger picture. For example, someone might ignore their body's actual signals. I feel fine today, because their sleep app gave them a low score, leaving them believing they must be tired or unwell. The mirror can distort as well as reflect. Moreover, outsourcing accountability raises the question, who sets the standards? If your productivity software flags you for a slump, is it because you truly weren't effective, or because it's using an overly rigid metric? In workplaces, this can become invasive. Imagine an algorithm nudging employees with emails to be happier or more engaged. One startup, Humu, did exactly that, using AI to send personalized nudges to workers in the name of productivity and happiness. It sounds innovative, but critics warn such practices blur the line between guidance and control. If leaders rely on algorithmic nudges, they might stop developing their own leadership skills, delegating judgment to a computer. Employees might become desensitized or even manipulated by these constant prompts. The risks of the AI mirror include a loss of spontaneity. life becomes a series of metrics to optimize. Reduced intrinsic motivation, we do things for the badge or streak, not personal conviction. It can also create a false sense of accuracy. Not everything important can be quantified, and an algorithm might miss context or nuance in human behavior. So, how do we use the mirror without losing ourselves? The key is to treat technology as a tool, not a tyrant. Self-tracking is best when it provides feedback, not verdicts. Use the data to learn about yourself, but don't let it dictate your worth. Maintain spaces of life that aren't measured. Unplugged time where you listen to your mind and demand transparency and ethics from any system meant to hold you accountable. Accountability in the tech age shouldn't mean obeying a robot overlord. It should mean using the robot to better obey your principles. Technology aside, let's zoom out to the human world, where not everyone is held to account equally. Why do some people get a free pass for bad behavior, while others are harshly punished for minor missteps? In the next chapter, we'll delve into the cultural codes of accountability, how factors like gender, race, and power dynamics determine who gets held accountable and who doesn't in our society.
Chapter 5. Cultural Codes of Accountability, Gender, Race, and Power. When a scandal breaks, do we judge the culprit solely by their actions, or do our reactions depend on who they are? In a perfect world, accountability is blind to status or identity. Everyone answers equally for their deeds. In reality, cultural biases and power structures heavily influence who gets held accountable, how swiftly, and with what consequences. Consider race and accountability in systems like criminal justice. The disparities are stark. Data consistently show that people of color are often dealt harsher penalties than their white counterparts for similar offenses. A U.S. sentencing study found that on average, Black and Latino defendants receive longer sentences than white defendants convicted of the same crimes. Bias means accountability isn't applied evenly, often tougher on marginalized groups. Policing tactics infamously targeted minorities, think stop and frisk policies, subjecting them to scrutiny and punishment more than others. It's hyper-accountability for small infractions blown up, minor crimes harshly punished, coupled with impunity for others. Next, gender. How are men and women treated in professional settings? Women sometimes face a paradox. On one hand, research suggests courts historically gave slightly more lenience to female offenders in certain cases. Women in leadership can be punished more severely for mistakes or perceived failures, a phenomenon often called the glass cliff. Women are given chances to lead during crises and then blamed for failure. Culturally, there's a long-standing trope of expecting women to be morally upright or nurturing, so when a woman errs, say a high-ranking executive scandal, the backlash can be vicious, laced with sexist undertones. How could she do that? Conversely, men, especially powerful men, have historically been given more passes. Boys will be boys, as the excuse goes. Power and privilege, regardless of gender, are perhaps the biggest factors. Those with wealth or connections have more ways to evade or minimize accountability. Consider a few notorious examples. A Stanford University athlete, Brock Turner, was convicted of sexual assault in 2015 and faced up to 14 years in prison. Yet the judge sentenced him to 6 months, of which he served 3. Why? The judge cited that a heavier sentence would have a severe impact on this young man's future. The public was outraged. It appeared that being a privileged star athlete from a good family counted in his favor, effectively shielding him from full accountability. Another case. A 16-year-old in New Jersey from an affluent background was accused of rape. The judge declined to try him as an adult, partly noting the boy's good family and potential college future. Privilege over justice, as critics dubbed it, highlighting that for the wealthy or well-connected, the system often bends to avoid consequences. This isn't just in the legal arena. In workplaces, a high-performing executive might get away with bullying because upper management values their results. until the scandal forces action. In families, a breadwinning member's bad behavior may be swept under the rug. We don't talk about what uncle did, because confronting it is socially inconvenient. Power shields people via loyalty, fear, or denial. Marginalized people are more likely to be penalized for assertive behavior that a privileged person could display without repercussion. For example, a Black woman in a meeting might temper her tone to avoid being labeled angry or unprofessional. She's holding herself accountable to stricter standards because she knows others won't give her the leniency a white male colleague might receive. Cultural stereotypes play a role too. If a narrative exists that X group is untrustworthy, they might be held to account more than those considered trustworthy. Conversely, if a group is stereotyped as good or competent, individuals from that group might receive undue benefit of the doubt. Studies show discipline can be harsher on students of color for the same misbehavior as white students due to implicit bias. Notice if the language differs. Terms like troubled versus thug, signaling who gets empathy and who gets scorn. The key takeaway is that accountability is often a reflection of power. Those at the top may evade it until public pressure demands a reckoning, while those at the margins may suffer excess scrutiny. However, these norms are being challenged more than ever. Social movements like Me Too and Black Lives Matter demand accountability from the privileged and for the marginalized, calling out double standards. Powerful individuals in entertainment, business, and politics face public and legal accountability, rare in earlier decades, largely because activists and ordinary people are refusing to accept the old excuses. In an equitable society, accountability would be consistent, neither scapegoating the vulnerable nor sparing the powerful. Getting there requires awareness of our biases, recognizing when we are cutting slack to someone just because they seem nice or remind us of ourselves, or when we're coming down hard on someone out of prejudice. It requires structural change, systems that check bias, like oversight committees, diverse leadership. When we hold everyone accountable by fair standards, we reinforce trust. Now, let's examine what happens when accountability is an illusion. We've heard non-apologies and seen leaders perform contrition without change. In the next chapter, we'll dissect the illusion of accountability, fake apologies and PR stunts that mimic responsibility but don't deliver real honesty or growth.
Chapter 6. The Illusion of Accountability. Fake apologies and public posturing mistakes were made. I'm sorry if anyone was offended. We take this very seriously. These phrases sound like apologies, but are they really? This chapter is about performative accountability, the art of appearing to take responsibility without actually doing so. From politicians and CEOs to influencers and celebrities, we've seen plenty of examples of the illusion of accountability in action. One hallmark is the non-apology apology. Rather than plainly saying, I was wrong, it's my fault, I'll fix it, the speaker deflects and obfuscates. For example, saying, I'm sorry you feel that way, shifts the focus to the feelings of the offended rather than the actions of the offender. It's a subtle linguistic sidestep. I'm sorry you feel that way isn't an apology. It invalidates the other person's experience by framing the offense as a perception. The person isn't truly owning the harm, they're just sorry you took it badly. We hear this in public scandals. A celebrity caught in bad behavior issues a carefully crafted statement, I apologize if my comments were misinterpreted, which is basically saying the mistake was in your understanding, not their actions. Another move is the conditional apology. To the extent that I hurt anyone, I am sorry. This casts doubt on the harm, to the extent that suggests maybe there wasn't much harm at all, and avoids clear responsibility. It's accountability with an asterisk. Then there's blame shifting or minimizing. A leader might say, yes, this happened, but I was under a lot of stress, or mistakes were made by the team, using passive voice or spreading blame to avoid personal culpability. These tactics create an illusion of accountability. The speaker sounds like they're acknowledging something, but at no point do they unequivocally say, "It was me. I was wrong." The media and public have grown more savvy at spotting these non-apologies. A recent example involved a government official found to have bullied staff. When confronted, she said, "I'm sorry my behavior has upset people. I never intended to upset anyone." Notice she's sorry for not the bullying itself, but for the feelings of others. The "I never intended" line serves to absolve her of malicious intent, as if intentions erase impact. Critics pointed out this apology failed to take real accountability. She didn't admit wrongdoing, nor promise to change. It was essentially, "I'm sorry you're upset," which is not the same as "I was wrong." Why do people engage in this pantomime of accountability? True accountability is hard. Admitting fault can have legal or reputational consequences. It's uncomfortable and requires vulnerability. Instead, PR teams try to thread the needle. Say enough to quell outrage, but not enough to accept liability. It's damage control, not soul-searching. We saw this with various corporate scandals. A company might issue a statement, "We regret any inconvenience caused by this issue and are reviewing our policies." A masterclass in saying almost nothing. Regret inconvenience sidesteps actual harm done. This issue stays vague about what happened, and reviewing our policies is a promise as thin as air unless followed by tangible changes, which often never materialize. The result of widespread illusory accountability is public cynicism. People feel apologies are cheap, and statements of taking responsibility are just theater. This is dangerous because it can erode trust even when someone is genuinely apologizing. The more we hear empty apologies, the harder it is to believe real ones. So, how to spot the difference? Sincerity is key. A real accountable apology usually has a few ingredients: a clear acknowledgement of what happened and why it was wrong, an expression of genuine remorse, without focusing on the apologizer's own suffering, an offer of amends or corrective action, and a commitment to do better. Compare, "Sorry if you were offended by my joke," to "I'm sorry for the hurtful joke I made. It was wrong and insensitive. I've learned from this error and will do better to respect others moving forward." The second is direct, admits fault, and focuses on the hurt and future improvement. It doesn't qualify the apology or sneak in self-justification. Accountability is an action, not just a statement. A leader who apologizes and then changes their behavior or makes restitution is showing accountability. One who apologizes and then repeats the offense or disappears and was likely never truly sorry. We've learned to measure accountability not by the press conference. This matters because without genuine accountability, individuals and institutions don't learn or improve. Fake apologies diffuse backlash, but teach you can escape consequences with clever words. Pushing for real accountability means not letting those in power off with a PR written sorry. It means asking, "What are you going to do about it? Show us." Transition. Now we turn to a quieter form of accountability: lapse. Not what people say or spin, but what they fail to do. Some of the greatest harms persist not because of active wrongdoing, but because of silence and inaction. In Chapter 7, we'll explore how failing to speak or act, being a silent bystander, makes one complicit. Accountability in silence is a critical concept in families, communities, and organizations.
Chapter 7: Accountability in Silence. The Cost of Inaction and Complicity. It's not my place to say anything. Someone else will step in. I just want to stay out of it. These phrases represent a hidden void of accountability. We often think of accountability as actively doing something wrong, but it can be failing to do what's right. Inaction in the face of wrongdoing, whether in a family, workplace, or society, can make one complicit. As the saying goes, silence is complicity. When we stay silent about injustice or abuse, we become accountable for allowing it to continue. Consider a few scenarios. In a company, an employee witnesses a colleague engage in unethical behavior, maybe financial fraud or harassment, but nothing. In a family, relatives know one member is abusive to their partner or children, yet they keep it a secret, never intervening or acknowledging the issue. In society, people see discriminatory behavior or hear hateful rhetoric, and they just turn away. The failure to act doesn't just avoid conflict, it enables the wrongdoing to persist. Philosophers and ethicists have argued that moral silence in such contexts makes one morally complicit. After all, if you are aware of a serious harm and do nothing, you've sided with the perpetrator or provided no resistance. This dynamic is illustrated in abuse situations. Survivors of domestic violence or child abuse often say that the indifference of those around them was an added betrayal. One survivor wrote, "Abuse thrives in silence. It feeds on indifference. People who knew and did nothing are just as bad as the abuser." Those are strong words, born of deep pain. Imagine enduring harm and realizing neighbors, friends, or family knew but chose not to get involved. The silence sends a message. Your suffering isn't worth my discomfort. Maintaining normalcy is more important than protecting you. Their silence was its own form of violence, telling me my pain wasn't worth their discomfort. Silence can take many forms. It might be a passive bystander effect. When people witness something bad, each is less likely to act, expecting someone else will. Or it might be an organized silence, like an unspoken family rule that you don't air dirty laundry, resulting in generations of repeated patterns, addiction, abuse, etc., that no one challenges. It can be a culture of fear. Employees see wrongdoing, but fear retaliation or ostracism if they speak up, so they remain quiet, and the misconduct continues unchecked.
One can argue that inaction is a form of action. Deciding not to report, not to speak, not to intervene, it changes outcomes. It often allows the harm to grow. Many major scandals, from corporate frauds to institutional abuses, reveal that many were aware and said nothing. How could that happen? Silence is easier, especially when speaking up carries risks. It's avoidance of accountability. I don't want trouble, and we don't want our group to look bad or to face consequences. However, the cost of such silence can be enormous. It can destroy lives, erode trust in institutions, and perpetuate systemic problems. For example, in cases of systemic harassment, say in a large company or in Hollywood, as seen in the Me Too movement, people might whisper warnings, but officially stay silent. The abuse continues until someone breaks the silence and triggers accountability. Often, when the truth comes out, it's clear that if more people had spoken up earlier, much harm could have been prevented.
Recognizing that not doing the right thing is itself a breach of responsibility. Modern discussions of ethics emphasize being an active bystander. If you witness something wrong, doing nothing shouldn't be the default. Consider personal safety and context, but the principle is that we all share a bit of accountability for the environments we're part of. As an old line goes, all that is necessary for evil to triumph is for good people to do nothing. Silence can be seen as co-accountability, sharing in accountability, but in a negative way. You become accountable with the wrongdoer for the outcome since you allowed it. Breaking silence can be incredibly hard. Whistleblowers often face severe backlash. They might lose their jobs or be ostracized. Family members who confront generational secrets can be disbelieved or shunned by others in denial. But when someone does speak up, it often empowers others to follow. Accountability can then shift back to where it belongs, on the person or system causing harm, rather than the silent sufferers. Cultivating accountability means encouraging dialogue and protecting those who speak out. Workplaces can establish confidential reporting and ensure whistleblower protection. Families can break the chain by fostering an environment where it's okay to talk and seek help. Society can honor and support truth tellers instead of shooting the messenger.
Finding our voices when it matters. Silence can dodge accountability. The language of accountability can be weaponized to hurt others. In the next chapter, we'll look at how the concept of holding someone accountable can be twisted into a control or gaslighting. What happens when accountability is weaponized in relationship?
Chapter 8. Weaponized Accountability, when holding you accountable becomes gaslighting. Accountability is supposed to be positive, a virtue. But what if someone turns it against you? In toxic dynamics, the language of accountability can be weaponized. Abusive partners, manipulative bosses, or narcissistic personalities might claim they are enforcing accountability when they are controlling, blaming, or gaslighting a domineering partner, for example. They might criticize their significant other for small mistakes, frame it as, "I'm just holding you accountable." Forgot to text back immediately? They accuse you of failing them. Didn't do a chore to their exact specification? They say you're not taking responsibility and make you feel guilty. Partners do hold each other responsible in fair ways, but a weaponizer uses the concept as a hammer for every nail. It becomes hypercriticism under the guise of righteousness. Gaslighting, a form of psychological manipulation, often involves flipping the script of accountability. For instance, an abusive person does something wrong but attacks the victim for it, reversing who is blamed. There's even an acronym for a common tactic: DAVO, deny, attack, and reverse victim and offender. The abuser denies what they did, attacks the person calling them out, and turns themselves into the victim. If confronted, they might say, "I can't believe you're accusing me. You're the one hurting me with these accusations." In essence, they claim the other person is the offender for misunderstanding or making them look bad. It's total avoidance of responsibility, plus an extra dose of blaming the actual victim. By doing so, the manipulator is using the concept of accountability in a twisted way. They insist they are innocent and the other must answer for the conflict. It's a form of control. In workplaces, consider a scenario where a manager publicly shames an employee for a minor error in the name of accountability. Calling someone out can be necessary in some cases, but doing it in a humiliating or disproportionate way turns it into corporate punishment theater. One leadership coach noted that in some organizations, accountability is used like a guillotine, not a growth mechanism. Instead of a private, constructive conversation, the boss might berate the employee in a meeting. The result isn't a learning moment, it's fear and shame. Other team members witness it and work harder out of fear of being next, but they're not truly more accountable in the healthy sense, they're just terrorized. Language of accountability can mask abuse. An emotionally abusive person might say, "I wouldn't have to criticize you if you didn't mess up so much. I'm trying to help you improve." This can make the victim question themselves. Maybe I do need this tough love, but it's a gaslighting trick. They're dehumanizing or shaming under the pretense of helping. Researcher Brené Brown points out, shame and belittlement are not tools of true accountability. Shame corrodes accountability. If someone's approach leaves you feeling worthless or confused, something is wrong. Online accountability, wielded as a weapon through call-out and cancel culture. Calling out bad behavior is often necessary, especially with public figures. But sometimes mobs frame harassment as holding someone accountable, when it's really a pile-on with little room for the person to learn or make amends. For example, a person might be cancelled for an old post. When they apologize, it's not enough, or worse, every aspect of their life is attacked. The line between demanding accountability and seeking vengeance can blur. A healthy accountability process would focus on wrongdoing and repair. A weaponized one turns into a barrage that can become disproportionate or personal beyond the issue at hand. How do we distinguish constructive accountability from weaponized accountability? Context and intent are key. Real accountability is anchored in mutual respect and aimed at improvement or justice. It involves clear expectations and fair consequences. Weaponized accountability is anchored in power, aimed at dominating or deflecting. It often comes with hypocrisy. The one holding others accountable doesn't subject themselves to the same standards, and with a lack of empathy. For example, a fair boss sets accountability by saying, "We didn't meet our target, let's figure out what each of us can do better. Here are the issues, let's address them." A toxic boss says, "We didn't meet our target because you failed. I don't want excuses. Fix it or else." The former is accountability in a collaborative, learning-oriented way. The latter is using accountability talk to instill fear and assert authority. If you suspect someone is weaponizing accountability, check reality. Are their criticisms valid or exaggerated? Do they take responsibility or only blame you? Do you feel empowered or just guilty and confused? A manipulator will make it such that you never feel like you've done enough, because their goal isn't your growth. In personal relationships, set boundaries. Agree to hold each other accountable for certain commitments. If one starts policing every move and calling it accountability, it's time to call out the behavior. True mutual accountability feels like teamwork, not tyranny. Societally, while we absolutely should hold powerful people accountable, we must be wary of accountability turning into a one-way weapon or an excuse for cruelty. The language of virtue can be co-opted by bullies. Our job is to keep eyes open to that trick. Transition. Having examined the misuses of accountability, from silence to weaponization, let's turn now to the battle between shame and accountability. What happens in our brains and hearts when we feel shame, and how is that different from healthy accountability and guilt? In Chapter 9, we'll explore the neurobiology of shame, why shame shuts down learning, and how we can cultivate growth and change without falling into shame's trap.
Chapter 9. The Neurobiology of Shame versus Accountability. From shutdown to growth. Think of a time you really messed up, that sinking feeling in your stomach, the heat in your face, the urge to either lash out or hide. That's shame. And think of a time you realized you made a mistake and thought, "I need to make this right." That's a more constructive feeling, perhaps guilt or accountability. Though shame and accountability both deal with acknowledging wrongdoing, they operate very differently in our psyche. In this chapter, we peer into the brain and mind, how shame can short-circuit learning and growth, and why a healthier approach focuses on guilt, specific behavior, rather than shame, global self-condemnation, when holding ourselves or others accountable. From a neurological perspective, shame is a powerful primal emotion. It's believed to involve the brain's networks for self-awareness and threat detection. When you experience shame, your body reacts as if under threat. Studies show shame can activate our stress response, spiking heart rate or triggering fight, flight, or freeze reactions. If you've ever frozen up when confronted with a serious personal failure, that's the freeze of shame. In evolutionary terms, shame might have served to keep us in good standing with our tribe. We feel bad to correct behavior and avoid exile. But in the modern context, if chronic or excessive, shame becomes toxic and paralyzing.
Neuroscientists differentiate shame and guilt. Guilt is about what you've done. Shame is about who you are. Brain imaging suggests they engage overlapping but distinct regions. Guilt lights up areas related to conscience and empathy, thinking about harm to others, whereas shame triggers areas linked to self-concept and social perception. Guilt arises when behavior conflicts with values. Shame arises when you've damaged how others see you or your own image. Shame tends to push people toward hiding or deceit, rather than positive change. Studies confirm shame often leads to withdrawal or destructive behaviors. People might lie, cover up, or avoid the issue. In contrast, guilt can motivate making amends. It's uncomfortable, but it usually comes with a pathway to relieve it. Apologizing, fixing the mistake, learning from it. Psychologist June Tangney, a leading expert on shame and guilt, found that guilt is an adaptive emotion, while shame is maladaptive. Guilt says, "I did something bad, I can do better." Shame says, "I am bad, there's no point in trying." If we drown someone in shame, or drown ourselves in it, we essentially shut down the parts of the psyche that enable growth, hope, self-efficacy, willingness to engage. Shame often triggers defensiveness or dissociation. A shamed employee, for instance, might start avoiding taking any initiative to avoid further shame, or become hostile and blame others.
Brené Brown states, "Shame corrodes the part of us that believes we can change and do better." That's why shame is antithetical to accountability. Accountability requires acknowledging a mistake and actively working to change or repair it. Shame's message creates a belief of being inherently flawed, which can lead to helplessness or repeated failures. If I believe I'm a screw-up, why bother trying? I'll either hide mistakes or resign myself to them. Consider how this plays out in a learning environment. Suppose a student fails a test. A shame response is, "I'm stupid." The student feels worthless and might stop trying or lash out. A guilt accountability response is, "I didn't study enough or use the wrong approach. I made mistakes I can correct." The student feels upset but sees a path forward. Study differently, seek help. Research in organizational psychology finds that employees who experience guilt after a failure are more likely to learn from it, whereas those who experience shame are more likely to withdraw or blame. Shame short-circuits the learning process by adding cognitive load, ruminating on how terrible one is, and stress, which impairs memory and problem-solving. It's like an emotional fog that blocks constructive action.
Cultivating a culture that encourages guilt over shame and growth over punishment is crucial. This is sometimes called a safe accountability environment. It means people are encouraged to own up to mistakes without fearing character assassination. For instance, a team can debrief a project failure by analyzing errors, accountability, framing it as, "These actions didn't work," rather than, "We're losers." Managers can model this by admitting their own mistakes without self-flagellation. "I take responsibility for X, and here's how I plan to improve," instead of, "I'm so awful, I failed you all," which might actually prompt the team to reassure the boss rather than fix the issue. Practicing self-compassion is key to healthy accountability. Being accountable to yourself doesn't mean beating yourself up. Harsh self-criticism can backfire, leading to procrastination or giving up. Self-compassion, treating yourself with kindness while still acknowledging mistakes, has been shown to increase motivation and resilience. It's the difference between telling yourself, "I made an unhealthy choice today, but I can get back on track tomorrow," versus, "I have no willpower. I ruined everything." The former accepts accountability, acknowledges the slip, and encourages improvement. The latter is pure shame and likely leads to abandonment of the goal. Neurologically, self-compassion, or empathetic feedback, keeps the prefrontal cortex, the thinking part, online and regulates the amygdala, the fear center. We stay in a state where we can learn and adapt rather than in fight-flight mode.
In summary, to cultivate growth instead of shutdown, we need to separate the deed from the doer. Focus on behavior that can change, rather than identity which feels fixed. Promote a mindset of "I am not my mistake." I can be accountable for my actions. See myself as well capable of growth. This mindset fuels what's known as a growth mindset, fuel abilities and traits as improvable with effort, which in turn makes accepting feedback and accountability much easier. As a society and in personal relationships, shifting from shame to accountability means we respond to wrongdoing with proportion to consequences and best to make it right, rather than permanent stigmatizing our character traits. For example, restorative justice in communities, as we'll touch on next, centers on the idea that offenders can take responsibility and change, rather than branding them irredeemable. By understanding the neurobiology and psychology here, we come to a helpful insight. Accountability, when done right, is liberating, not crushing. It frees us to learn from an individual practice to a community value علامة استفهام. We'll explore the journey from self to community, how healthy accountability can be shared, how wisdom is passed down generations, and how embracing accountability together can lead to stronger, more connected communities.
Chapter 10. From Self to Community. Co-accountability, intergenerational wisdom, and collective growth accountability may start with the self, but it doesn't end there. In the grand scheme, accountability is a team sport, a cultural practice, a legacy we inherit and bequeath. In this final chapter, we consider how accountability flourishes in communities and across generations. How do we hold each other accountable in constructive ways? What can elders teach the youth, and vice versa, about responsibility? How do we create a culture where accountability is about trust and continuous improvement for all? Accountability highlights shared responsibility. Think of a group project where each member has an individual task, but the success depends on everyone doing their part. If one person slips, others can gently call them in and help, rather than simply punish or cover for them. In a strong community, be it a workplace, family, or a neighborhood, people develop a sense of accountability. We rise and fall together. I will encourage you to do your best, and I expect you to encourage me too. Accountability is the contract you make with yourself. Accountability is the contract you make with others. It's an agreement. I will do what I said, and we as a group will support each other and hold each other to our commitments.
A powerful example of accountability is restorative justice circles. Instead of a top-down punishment when someone harms another, the community comes together in a mediated circle. The offender, victim, and community members talk about what happened and how to make it right. The offender is held accountable by the community. They explain themselves, confront the impact of their actions, and then work on a way to repair harm. The community, for its part, holds itself accountable to support both the victim's healing and the offender's positive reintegration. The underlying philosophy defines accountability as taking responsibility and taking action to repair the harm done. That second part, repair, is crucial. It reflects an understanding that accountability's end goal is healing and improvement, not simply punishment. Accountability is woven into the stories and values that elders pass down. Think of grandparents teaching grandchildren the importance of honesty, sharing cautionary tales of what happened when someone in the past broke trust, or positive tales of integrity rewarded. These narratives are intergenerational wealth, a form of wisdom about accountability. In many cultures, elders emphasize communal responsibility, that each person's actions affect the whole community's well-being. For instance, Indigenous teachings often stress that we must be accountable not just to people here and now, but to future generations, hence the concept of being stewards of the land, etc. They encourage thinking about how today's choices will impact people decades down the line, a deep form of accountability that transcends one's own lifetime.
On the flip side, younger generations today are also teaching elders about accountability in new ways. We see youth activists, teenagers, and young adults holding older leaders accountable on climate change, social justice, and equality. They're saying, "We inherited a world with problems you failed to fix. Now we demand accountability and action so our children won't suffer." One example is climate activist Greta Thunberg admonishing world leaders for their inaction on climate crisis, famously saying, "How dare you?" and "We will be watching you," a call for accountability to future generations. This dynamic shows accountability isn't just top-down. It can be bottom-up, with the youth reminding power holders of their responsibilities. Building a community of accountability involves trust, support, and open communication. Communities can formalize this through accountability groups or boards. Some cities have community accountability boards, where citizens work with officials to review incidents, like police conduct, and ensure fairness. In workplaces, a culture of peer accountability might mean teammates feel comfortable reminding each other of deadlines or quality standards without it being taken personally because there's mutual respect.
One practical tool is accountability partnerships. Two people agree to check in on each other's goals. This is popular in fitness or entrepreneurship. You pair up, share what you intend to do, and regularly report progress. Knowing someone else is holding you accountable can boost follow-through. It works best when it's empathetic, cheering successes, understanding slip-ups while still prompting you to refocus. Notice how different this feels from the weaponized or shaming approaches we discussed earlier. It's rooted in care. I want you to succeed and be your best, and I trust you want the same for me. As communities, we need to balance accountability with forgiveness and growth. When someone has paid their dues or earnestly changed, we acknowledge that and welcome them fully. For example, a community might hold a member accountable for wrongdoing by requiring them to make amends and learn. But once that process is done, the community's role is to support their positive reintegration, not to permanently ostracize them. In an accountable community, everyone understands their role and the impact of their actions on others, and everyone believes in each other's capacity to learn and improve.
Healthy accountability might look like this. Parents admit to kids when they make a mistake, modeling accountability, and kids are taught age-appropriate responsibility for their actions, with guidance rather than punishment. Over time, the child internalizes that owning up to mistakes is the start of making things better. They carry that forward, teaching it to their own kids someday. Accountability becomes an intergenerational chain of wisdom, refined. Notice how we've gone from individual habits, trauma, shame, to collective, cultural biases, community healing, generational change. Accountability threads through all of it. It's the backbone of trust in any relationship or society. Without accountability, trust breaks down between friends or citizens and government. With accountability, trust builds, and with trust, cooperation and progress become possible. Ultimately, accountability is a gift we give to ourselves and each other. It's not a punishment, it's a path to growth, integrity, and stronger bonds. When we practice it with compassion and consistency, we create positive change. A child raised with loving accountability becomes an adult who stands by their word. A community that values accountability becomes one where people feel safe and supported to do the right thing. And a society that demands accountability from all, regardless of power, becomes more just and equitable. As we wrap up, think about your circles. How can you foster a culture of accountability? How can you model it in a way others want to follow? Sometimes it starts small. Admitting you missed the mark before pointing out others' errors, or having that honest conversation in your family. These acts can inspire others, creating a powerful domino effect of integrity.
We've traveled through 10 chapters of accountability. Let's recap key milestones.
Chapter 1: The Currency of Accountability. Accountability builds trust like currency. Reputation is a bank account, and every act of responsibility deposits social credit, while every dodge of blame makes a withdrawal. In short, accountability enriches our relationships and credibility.
Chapter 2: Accountability versus hyper-independence. Sometimes what looks like extreme accountability is actually trauma in disguise. Hyper-independence, doing everything yourself, can stem from past hurt and mistrust. Healthy accountability involves trust and delegation, not carrying the world alone.
Chapter 3: Accountability Fatigue. Holding yourself accountable is great, but toxic productivity and the dopamine addiction to achievement can lead to burnout. Balance and self-care are crucial. You're not a robot, and rest is not a failure.
Chapter 4: The AI Mirror. Technology's role. Tracking apps and AI can keep us on point, but outsourcing all our self-awareness to algorithms is risky. We must use these tools wisely, maintaining our agency and privacy. Tech can inform our accountability, but it shouldn't control our destiny.
Chapter 5: Cultural Codes of Accountability.
We confronted the reality that accountability isn't one size fits all in society. Bias and privilege mean some people skate by while others face harsh accountability. Recognizing and challenging those double standards is part of building a fairer world.
Chapter 6: The Illusion of Accountability. We dissected fake and PR apologies. We learned to spot the non-apologies. True accountability means real remorse and change, not just managing optics. Words are hollow if not backed by action.
Chapter 7: Accountability in Silence. We explored how inaction can make us complicit. Silence siding with wrongdoing. The takeaway: doing nothing is a choice with moral weight. We are called to find courage to speak and act when it counts.
Chapter 8: Weaponized Accountability. We warned that accountability language can be misused as a weapon. From gaslighting abusers to bullying bosses, some twist holding you accountable into a tool of control. We must ensure accountability is used to heal, not to harm.
Chapter 9: Neurobiology of Shame vs. We found that shame shuts down growth, whereas guilt, or acceptable remorse, promotes it. Shama's message, I am bad, can paralyze, while focusing on, I did something bad, allows learning. Compassionate accountability, separating the mistake, drives improvement better than shame.
Chapter 10: From Self to Community. We broaden the view to collective accountability. The best outcomes happen when accountability is shared, in families, teams, and communities that support each other in staying responsible and learning from missteps. Wisdom passed down through generations, and youth pushing elders to do better, all in the service of a more accountable society. Accountability isn't a lonely road. It's a highway we build and travel together.
Now, standing at the end of this journey, what's the road ahead for you? Think about your own life. Is there a conversation you need to have? A person you need to apologize to? Or a promise you need to renew? Is there a boundary you need to set with someone who misuses accountability to hurt you? Or the bystander moment where next time you could speak up?
Here's the call to action. Take one insight from this video and put it into practice. Maybe it's as simple as admitting to your friend, hey, I realized I dropped the ball on our plans. I'm sorry and I want to make it up to you, instead of making an excuse. Maybe it's deciding to unplug from that toxic productivity app for an afternoon and give yourself grace. Or maybe it's joining a community initiative that holds local leaders accountable, adding your voice to the call for justice. Let's keep this conversation going together. Accountability flourishes in community. You, the viewers, can support each other. Share your thoughts in the comments. What resonated with you? Do you have experiences with accountability, or lack thereof, that others could learn from? Perhaps you've navigated a tough apology, broken out of a hyper-independent mindset, or changed a culture of silence. Your story might be the wisdom that helps someone else on their journey.
Not only let's make know this content helped you, but it also aids others in discovering this video. Subscribe to join our thoughtful community, we explore topics like this in depth, and I'd love for you to be part of future discussions. And don't forget to ring the notification bell so you don't miss upcoming episodes. We have more journeys to take and more ideas to explore together. Accountability is a continuous journey, not a ultimate destination. We're all walking it step by step, learning as we go. Let's commit right now to be a little more accountable in our own lives and a little more supportive of accountability in others. By doing so, we earn the kind of trust, respect, and growth that makes life richer and communities stronger. Thank you for watching and reflecting. Now, go out there and continue your accountability journey. And remember, the way we hold ourselves and each other accountable today shapes the better world we can live in tomorrow.